were to tell you that there was a modern-day Frankenstein anime that involves serial killers and neo-Nazis? Well, hello, darlings. It's me, Freddie Uranus, and today we're going to be talking about the anime Monster. In 1818, Mary Shelley wrote what would become one of the most notable works in literary history. With Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, Shelley practically invented the modern genre of science fiction, and she added Frankenstein's monster, Frankenstein is the scientist, by the way, to what would become a growing canon of Gothic horror monsters. Now today when you think of Frankenstein, you probably think of that big green guy who dances to the monster mash with Dracula and the Wolfman. But in 1818, the story of Frankenstein wasn't all that far-fetched. You see, Shelley was writing at a turning point in the history of the world. Think the revolution of the internet, but on a much grander scale. For centuries, science had essentially just been a mixture of conjecture and religious superstition. When someone had a question about the way the world worked, they would usually turn to a member of the clergy, whose answer was most likely because God made it that way. But all of that changed with the Enlightenment and the invention of humanism. Huge advancements were made in the areas of art, literature, science, and medicine. People began to ask questions and actually attempt to answer them empirically. Religion and tradition no longer dominated social thought. Instead, an emphasis was put on us, the human race. Suddenly, humans had the knowledge and power to extend life through the advancements of medicine. Scientists even began experimenting with electricity on the human body. All of these advances led to one conclusion. As the philosopher Nietzsche put it, God is dead. Now, this phrase has less to do with the theoretical existence of a creator God and more to do with man's own newfound position in the post-Enlightenment world. After all, if it's God who decides who lives and who dies, and a doctor comes in and saves someone's life, does that make him God? The moral dilemma of playing God continues to this day, and it's the very problem that Frankenstein addressed in 1818. So for those of you who didn't do your assigned reading in the 8th grade and read manga instead, let me give you a brief summary. Frankenstein is the story of a brilliant scientist, Frankenstein, he's the scientist, who discovers the key to life itself. So using his newfound knowledge, he reanimates a corpse, but he's so horrified by the creature that he creates that he completely abandons it. The creature, who is left all alone in the world, goes into hiding, and when he realizes just what the world views him as, a monster, he becomes just that, a monster, a murderer. A bunch of other stuff goes on, and you should honestly read the book because it's actually a really good read. But in the end, Frankenstein makes it his life mission to hunt down the monster that he created because he feels responsible for the murders that the monster has committed, being its creator. Now, keep all of that in your mind, but make it an anime about a Japanese surgeon living in Germany during its reunification, and get rid of all of the science fiction-y stuff. Got it? Okay, good. Now enter Naoki Urasawa's mystery thriller Monster. Monster follows the story of Dr. Kenzo Tenma, a brilliant Japanese surgeon who's working at a hospital in Dusseldorf, Germany. One day, Tenma is forced to make an impossible decision when two patients are rushed in at the very same time. One is an important politician suffering from a brain aneurysm. The other is a young boy named Johann who was shot in the head while his entire family was massacred after their defection from East Germany. Tenma has to choose which he will operate on and save, and which he will let die because apparently the rest of the staff at the hospital are completely incompetent. Now think about that for a moment. One could justifiably argue that doctors and surgeons play God on a daily basis. After all, it's their job to extend the lives of people who would normally die from natural causes. But Tenma has to literally decide which patient will live and which one will die. And if that's not a clear metaphor for playing God, I don't know what is. Tenma inevitably chooses to save the life of the young boy. And the other patient dies because, again, apparently all the rest of the doctors are incompetent. Well, 9 years pass, and Tenma is reunited with Johan, only to find out that Johan has become a serial killer. A monster. You see where I'm going with this, right? Now, a lot of absolutely insane things happen, and I don't want to spoil this anime for you guys because it's so good and you just need to watch it. But returning to our Frankenstein analogy, Dr. Tenma ultimately makes it his life's mission to track down Johan and kill him, just like Frankenstein and his monster. Now, what I find so incredibly fascinating about this story is the responsibility that Dr. Tenma feels for Johan's actions. I mean, think about it. I think most of us would all agree that Dr. Tenma did nothing wrong when he saved that 9-year-old boy. After all, he had no idea what that boy was going to become. Still, Tenma feels responsible for all of the murders that Johan has committed, because if he hadn't have saved his life, those people wouldn't be dead. Likewise, you could argue that when Frankenstein created his monster, he had no idea that he would become a murderer. Although, he probably should have had the foresight to realize that playing with life after death might have some unintended consequences. And he should have definitely not just abandoned his creation. Yikes. Mistakes were made. But in a sense, Tenma created Johan, just like Frankenstein created his monster. Which is why I find the name of this anime and manga to be so perfect. Monster. I mean, it says everything just in the name. Now, I have only scratched the surface of the plot, and let me tell you, it is an absolutely insane ride that includes neo-Nazis, children's books, a bunch of interchangeable children running from the law, and a character that is basically L if L was a middle-aged German dude. Seriously, his name even starts with L. He's pretty awesome, not gonna lie. The story is so compelling, and there are mysteries that are introduced in the very first episode that aren't resolved until the final episode. I gave this series a 10 out of 10 on my anime list, and trust me, I do not give that series lightly. The only complaint that I had with the entire series was that there were a few filler episodes, especially towards the beginning, that didn't really seem to further the plot. They were just kind of there to show that the main character is a good guy, which I feel like the anime didn't have to do because, like, he's our protagonist. We get it. He's our hero. He's a good guy. But other than that, the series was super solid. Great animation, great voice acting. It did feel a little bit older than it actually was, but that makes perfect sense since it actually takes place in the late 90s. The writing was absolutely superb. I really want to check out the manga for this anime, and I also want to check out Urasawa's other works because I've heard they're really good as well. I especially want to check out 20th Century Boys and Pluto, the latter of which is actually a retelling of Osamu Tezuo's Astro Boy, but like with a kind of crazy twist. and that sounds super, super interesting. And in case you were wondering, I am using Monster to count as one of my entries for the bronze medal in the Anime Olympics. I used it for an anime with only one word in the title. I know there are probably tons of other anime that were a lot shorter that fulfilled that requirement that I could have watched, but that's not really the point. The point of me doing this challenge is to watch all the anime that, you know, I've wanted to watch but haven't got around to yet. And this is definitely one that I've wanted to watch, but because it was, you know, on the longer side, I kind of put off. But I am so glad I watched it because it was just a very nice little hidden gem of an anime that you don't hear talked about too often. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you would like to see how I began my journey to the Anime Olympics, I will link that down below, and stay tuned for more anime related content. Goodbye, darling.